Oh, all right. Well, hello, everyone. This is the Quality Matters Business Visionaries Book Club. So I'm here again with Steve Lewis, Rob Thompson, and we are talking about a book that I picked this time. Of course, I think these guys are regretting that I did it because it's a little long, a little geeky, but you'll get the highlights here.
Mm-hmm.
It is Out of the Crisis. It is probably the I guess you call it close to the masterpiece of Edward Deming. Edward Deming's, as I talk about in the podcast, otherwise is the father of modern quality management. Incredibly brilliant guy, maybe a little dry as an author, but incredibly brilliant work. So the book, as you see here, is quite thick and dense and tiny print and tiny margins.
What year is it from, too?
I think 86.
So older than most of our listeners.
Yes, it's still horribly vital for what we do today. Like so much of the modern philosophy of Six Sigma, all this stuff comes largely from the work of either Deming or Dran or Schwartz, some of these earlier kind of fathers modern quality management. But really good, useful book. So we're going to talk mostly about what he calls the 14 points today.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to try not to ramrod the conversation because I know I have a little bit of tendency to do that.
You're passionate about this topic.
I love this stuff. I love it. So I will let Steve get started here. So tell us, Steve, a little bit kind of about your thoughts and reactions to the book here.
Okay. Yeah. Well, look, I thought I was really clever one day back when I was an engineer. I went to the client who was very demanding. And I said, look, if you want it fast and cheap, it won't be good.
Right.
If you want it cheap and good, it won't be fast. And if you want it good and fast, it won't be cheap.
Right.
So fast, cheap, or good, pick two of the three.
And we've all heard that.
Yeah. I thought I was brilliant. And he says, well, I believe you can have all three.
Yeah.
And I was speechless. I didn't know what to say after that. But over time, I came to the realization you can have all three.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the primary tenet in this book on the first page, in that first chapter, where he says, productivity increases as quality improves. Why? Because there's less rework.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's where quality comes into, and it's not really a quality discussion topic. It's really a management topic.
Yes.
And so I love that. So I don't think he talked about it in the book, but I saw a video about it where he went to the Ford Motor Company back in the early 80s when they were losing literally $1 billion a year. And they brought him in as a quality consultant to fix their quality problem. But instead, he went and just torched management. Said, look, 85% of your problems at Ford are due to management.
Yes.
And then he brought into these 14 points.
Yeah.
And so even though, yes, this was a tough read, those 14 points really resonated with me.
Yeah.
So I look forward to talking to you about this today.
Absolutely. Now, Rob, you are obviously in sales today, and that's the life
correct.
you live and breathe.
Yeah.
But you got a background here as well.
I got a deep background in this. Early on in my career, I was an expert on imaging processing and data entry. And when I was given the department, we were at about an 80% accuracy rate in our work. And we were doing a ton of rework. So I was told, fix it or you're fired. And that's just the way it was back then. So I fixed it, of course, and dug deep into Deming and Duran and total quality management processes, and really helped design processes that helped us achieve our goal.
Right.
And our goal was to get to about a 99% accuracy rate.
Okay.
And we tracked everything and really implemented a lot of these tenets. We got away with no more slogans and stuff. We really dug in.
No defects.
No.
Perfect at first time.
Well, we did have one slogan: "Do it right or you're fired." But beyond that,
it's very motivating.
Yes.
Inspirational.
Yeah.
So, but once we get past that, what we did is we reworked our systems.
Mm-hmm.
When the work would come in before, we'd have one person data entry it and then send it off. We actually put in a system of dual entry where one person entered it, another person did blind entry, and we put a quality control step in place where we were doing a random sample of the work to identify what types of errors we were getting. Once we identified the errors we're getting, we were able to dig into actual specific fields, like everyone keeps messing up the state,
Right.
or they're not entering phone numbers right. And sometimes it was a matter of what the difference between a European and an American 7 was.
Okay.
And then as time went on, we looked at technology. We moved to an OCR scanning process where we redesigned our applications that people would fill out. And those applications would come in, we'd run them through an OCR scanner. They'd all be mapped to the fields in the system. And then versus checking and doing quality on individuals, we're doing quality on the systems.
Yes.
And we'd only have to do rework when the system couldn't read it.
Right.
And people would get just an image of what was on the document in the data entry field and do the correction. And at that point in time, AI wasn't a thing.
Right.
So you didn't have the ability to say, okay, the machine learning where it would get better and better. Now, if you look at OCR and document recognition, the AI kicks in, and if it sees that it's not reading specific fields the same way, now it fixes that stuff.
Right.
And over time, we got to about a 99.8% accuracy rate.
Fantastic.
And before we kicked off, we were talking about productivity and everything that went through the roof. And I'm not part of that group anymore. But when I started there, we had about 2,500 people. And I think over time, by putting in systems and automation, it's probably about 300 people that do the same amount of work.
Yeah, that doesn't surprise me at all. Now, most people listening to this probably hear automation, and that's the buzzword that's kicking in for them. But really, the buzzword that people should be paying attention to here is systems, and that's something Deming spends no lack of time talking about. Is really the difference in a system versus processes. You know, you need these little small things.
Oh yeah.
You know, I was reading recently because I'm not saying there's no place for Six Sigma. I'm not saying it's not a useful tool, but it is strictly a tool. And so I was reading recently, I wish I could remember the details right now, but effectively they did the study of Fortune 500 companies that had some significant implementation of Six Sigma. And what they found is that 80% of those companies that had the Six Sigma implementation failed financially within the next 10 years. Or had some major restructuring or some major downturn because they focus so much effort on a tiny, tiny piece of their business rather than focusing on it as a whole. And so all these pieces have to fit together. And so if you focus too much time on one little detail, like with your example, if you just spend all the time focusing on the state to begin with, you'd have missed everything else.
Oh, yeah.
But well, we got the state perfect. Yay.
Yeah. But everything else is wrong. The dollar amount, everything else. But yeah, to your point, it really drove down to a lot of leadership and prioritization.
Yeah.
We had a focus. It was a lot of work to do, but it was really looking at the overall process. And we were blessed. We had a good group of leaders that pushed us, but also did it in a way that says, okay, you guys have a little bit of latitude to make these corrections.
Yeah.
And I was laughing. We were talking beforehand with you guys, and I've always worked in an office, and the worst injuries I've ever seen in my office, I don't know, maybe a paper cut or someone touches the coffee pot the wrong way. But you guys have worked in heavy industry where like people can die, accidents really bad happen.
Oh yeah. It's you know, what we're talking about before we started recording here is you know, I had a guy once who had a back injury, and he didn't tell us about it. It was like 3 weeks later. Now, let me tell you, that was fun going back and forth with management, trying to figure out, like, do we count as recordable? Do we not? Is it work related? How do we know? And in the end, we wound up counting it as a work related injury and taking care of him. But it's like, daggum, why didn't you tell us about this 3 weeks ago when it happened? And really, the reason was simple: is I was pushing this notion of no accidents, no injuries, because I thought that was a great way to do it. Let's rally people around it. But I didn't give them all the backup they need to know. Like, what if something does happen, and how do you actually achieve it?
Right. The unintended consequences, people just don't report those incidents.
Yes.
Oh yeah. People will adjust, and they'll just reprioritize things that they're going to talk about.
Play the game.
Play the game. That's a great way to put it.
Yeah. So I guess let's start by going through a few of the 14 points here. So obviously the one that stands out for me, and this is just because of my own personal experience and personal stupidity managing a program before, is I was all about the slogans, because I thought that's what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to put this slogan on the wall and tell everyone go for it. But it didn't work out real well. Another one, drive out fear, because unfortunately those two kind of tend to go together, right?
Mhm.
Well, if I don't live up to whatever the slogan or mantra is, then I'm going to get fired, which sounds a little bit
Yeah.
like maybe where y'all
Yeah.
came from.
And I think the shift is, I think you can have a rally cry,
Mhm.
but not a slogan. I
like
think when you look at the first purpose of creating purpose for the improvement,
Yeah.
why are you doing what you're doing? And then the other piece is, if you dig into the psychology of how people are motivated, looking at if they're externally or
Mhm.
internally motivated, some people are just motivated to do a good job.
Yeah.
And also to put the client first. So
Right.
if you come up with that kind of, not a slogan so much, but a mantra that says why we're doing this and why it's important, I think it's different than saying like 0 defects or
Right.
I notice engineers are really good at following directions,
Yes.
predicated on the fact if you explain to them why they do that first.
Yes. Well, that'll totally change how you go about achieving the goal, which ultimately influences the output.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. We had a really poor time reporting system at one of my companies, and everyone had to get their timesheets in order to get paid.
Mhm.
So what did management say? Do your timesheet by Friday at noon or you don't get paid.
Yeah.
Well, people thought that was a punishment, but we explained, no. But do your timesheets by noon, because if you don't, then you can't get paid. We don't have the system won't work. You can't get paid.
Right.
When I explained it that way, we had it from virtually maybe like 50% people doing their timesheets on time to about 100%.
Yeah.
Because they didn't want to be the person responsible for not letting their friend not get paid.
Mhm.
Yes. No, can't remember if it's from this book or another letter of Deming, but he had a similar thing. It was actually Ford. Someone at Ford had called him because they were having terrible problems for whatever this plant was, getting the paychecks out on time. And so it was this issue of dual responsibility, right? So the employee was supposed to fill out their timesheet, but their supervisor was supposed to approve it. So what wound up happening is the employees wouldn't fill out all of the details, in the detail necessary for payroll to run it. And the supervisor was expecting the employee would do it. The employee was expecting the supervisor to check it.
Mm.
And so in the end, it was something like 30% of the timesheets were screwed up by the time they got to payroll, and they could never get payroll run. And so it was a very similar thing. They said, look, if it's not there, it gets sent back. And Deming had expected it to take, I think, like 3 payrolls to get fixed. Problem got fixed that first
Amazing.
payroll. Once those first time tickets got sent back out onto the floor, boom, everyone got the idea.
Very cool.
Isn't it interesting? You think that you institute some redundancy to
Mhm.
make sure things don't fall through the cracks.
Yeah.
But by doing that, you basically let that one party assume that the other party is going to do it.
Yes.
So they don't do their job,
Yes.
and the other party thinks the same thing, and you have even bigger cracks than you had in the first place.
Yep. So I think that one actually came from the point number 3, cease dependence on inspection to achieve quality, which people find crazy. But that was the point here: is the supervisor was the inspection step for that timesheet.
Mhm.
So everyone just assumed he'd find if there's a problem.
Mhm.
So I know I've run into that issue with welders before. Man, some of these welders will just put out absolute crap welds. And why do they do it? Well, he'll check it. If it's bad, he'll let me know, and I'll just grind it and fix it.
They get paid per weld.
Yeah, it's
Interesting.
it's interesting stuff. So
Mhm.
Number 3 was the one that really blew my mind.
Mhm.
Because I always think in terms of quality control is the inspection part of it.
no,
Well, that's at least identifying the problem, but that's not solving the problem.
it's too late once you found
It's
it
too
there.
late, yeah.
It's too late. Now, it doesn't mean you don't need inspection steps, but how can you engineer your process so you don't need them?
Mhm.
And man, we should have had like this recording before we started talking, because it's like all the good stuff. So you'd mentioned something earlier about can't have it fast and good, right? Or cheap. But as you increase your productivity, quality increases, and vice versa. So if you can increase the quality, let's say you have 100 steps in the process. Well, that's 100 opportunities for something to go wrong if you only get 10 steps in the process. So the more you can simplify that process and those critical points, you just reduce all sorts of needs for checks.
No, I think the check, you don't do away with it, but it can be a random sample versus making it 50% of your process. And if you can reduce that number down, if you have 100 people and 50% of them are doing quality control
Mhm.
and the other 50 are doing the data entry, and you come to some statistical sample that makes sense, you lower that number down to 10, put those other 40 people slow them down.
Yeah.
And have them do the data entry right, it helps the process in the long run. The other piece on the dependency on the inspection, once you focus on inspection, you don't look at the process from the beginning. And for most of the industries I've worked in, the process actually starts with the client or with the design of the documents that we're having people create. So if we didn't look at all the way back to look at the marketing pieces, look at the application design, look at where, and you got to think this is silly stuff, but when the printer printed out a new account application and put the fold over where the person needed to write, then it was harder to read. So we had to step all the way back and actually redesign new account apps to make sure we accounted for where the fold was.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
So, but when you have that mindset of focusing just on the capturing errors at the end, you don't back up to all the way everything that comes into play and do it. I remember spending hours on whiteboards, is balancing it back to like what is the seed, and then what happens from that seed all the way to the time when it's done.
People aren't willing to readjust that plan. They just want to keep barreling forward and make changes after the fact. But that's the whole idea of the PDLC cycle. Sorry, PDCA. I'm getting software development mixed up here. PDCA is plan, do, check, act. Now, when Deming wrote it, he called it plan, do, study, act, because real intent on find the source of the problem doesn't work well.
Plus, he was a consultant to get paid more using fancy words.
He was a PhD.
This is true.
Yeah. You bring up a really good point that it starts in the beginning. Maybe it's the client that really dictates what level of quality they're going to be expecting. Because if they are going for a competitive bid and then they're telling everyone, hey, price is the king here. Whoever has the lowest price is going to win. Well, they're basically saying we're accepting low quality. Through that. Because if you have to low bid to win it, then your engineers don't have enough time to design it. Your SDM, your supply chain is going to find the cheapest parts. You're going to do it as fast as you can. Just get it out because you need to save that money.
Now, I'm going to interrupt you there for a second because you bring up a good point about balancing price with quality. Now, I know from a recent post of yours that you were flying a lower cost airline. Versus flying like Emirates or something like that. Now, when you look about cost, if you were looking and evaluating the different airlines, and they said their on-time record is a little lower, maybe you'd pay for that, right? But let's say their crash rate was a little higher. Like, where are you willing to give up price? Like, would I buy a $33 round trip ticket if I knew there was only like what percentage? 97% chance I'd get there in time, and 3% of the time we'd crash. Like that, the equation you got to balance out. So,
I talk about that when we do our risk assessment. Part of the workshops we do a whole lot, and again, it all comes from the stuff Deming teaches. But this is everything we do on a FEMA any day of the week. Is like, what's the likelihood of occurring? What's the severity? How bad is it going to be if something bad happens? And how easy is it to detect? And so if you can decrease any one of those three, you've significantly reduced your risk.
Yeah.
And so I use I love silly example. So I use the example of like if you're swimming at the beach, but what's the chance of getting attacked by a shark? Well, how big of a risk is it to get attacked by a shark?
And how bad are the shark attacks?
Yes. And so then you take a look at it. So let's just make the assumption if you get bit by a shark, you're going to lose a limb or you're going to die. So we'll give that like an 8 on the severity.
Okay.
Now,
I'd give that 10, but okay.
Well, I'd say 10's multiple people die.
Well, 10 is, okay. I would say a 10 would be one person die.
Yeah. So
but then 8 is just losing a limb.
Yeah.
And then what's just the bite? Like, say I just get a nibble on the leg. Like, just,
We'll probably put that as 6 or something.
6? What's like a 2? What's a 2 then? Just like a nudge, a shock nudge?
A thumb, a hangnail.
Okay.
I give it a hangnail.
Scare the hell out of you.
Yeah. And so then, take a look at it. Well, how likely is it to happen? Okay, well, we know that about as many people get struck by lightning as get bit by a shark. It's really low likelihood.
Interesting.
But then you think about, the detectability. Now,
yeah, but back up there for a second. That's misleading because you can get hit by lightning anywhere. You're going to be in the ocean to get bit by a shark.
Correct. Okay,
so I don't know if those stats will correlate.
But you can play with the numbers a little bit. You can play with the numbers a little bit. And so then we give, what's the likelihood of it happening? Well, if I never go to the beach, there's no likelihood.
Yeah.
So I'll give you that.
Unless there's a sharknado.
Well, then all bets are off.
Yeah.
But I'd assume that would have happened last year. All the crazy crap
Oh my
happened
God.
last year.
Hey,
That's a 2020 type problem.
Yes. And then we'll talk about like detection. So how easy to even see if it's a problem, right?
Mhm.
So detection, I think that's what makes the whole COVID thing such a scary thing for so many people, is because there are people that silently carry it with no symptomatic. You can't
Mhm.
detect that crap.
Nope.
We don't like lack of detection.
Mhm.
Now, if you're walking around, your face turned purple, COVID. All right, fine.
Well, you may want to call it a hospital. So you turn purple. That's bad.
But yeah, so okay, it's
Choking.
just kind of basic stuff.
Mhm.
But no, it's again, all this stuff kind of comes from the book here. So you mentioned customer. So I want to look this up. He says everyone, whether he sees the customer or not, has a chance to build quality into the product or the service offered. The people that see the customers have a role that is not usually appreciated by supervisors or other management. I gotta say, I used to be this guy. I hated the sales folks. Absolutely hated you guys.
Well,
So much hate.
It was adversarial though.
Yes.
And didn't it?
Oh man, the sales guys promised all sorts of crap that we didn't know how to deliver, and then we didn't know how to communicate what we were doing to them. And so it's just this back and forth, BS.
You can figure it out though. You got it delivered.
That's true.
Yeah.
So-
It's not pretty, but you get it done.
Yeah. But I mean, that kind of goes to the point you're making. It's like, well, how do you get the best of all three worlds? Fast, cheap, and good.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, clearly Toyota figured it out in the 70s and 80s.
Yeah.
And that's a recurring theme in this. It's about communication.
Yes.
So understand where whose inputs or whose outputs, and figure out really what is where is that line where you can actually deliver.
Yeah.
He was talking a lot about quotas, and so the unintended consequences, if you have a quota, you're going to hit it and do whatever it takes to hit that number.
Right.
Similar for sales commission. You tell sales guys, look, you got to hit this number. Well, they just try and get the deal done.
Yeah.
Right.
So
They don't look at profitability at that point, high margin. They will pad their numbers if they want to, all kinds of stuff.
someone's playing the game, but that's not the real goal. And so I guess that goes back to the first one, is this constancy of purpose.
Yeah.
What is our purpose here? It's not just to get crap out the door.
No. Every procedure we put out, I mean, it's not an uncommon thing to put a purpose statement in a procedure, but I emphasize to folks that purpose statement is justifying why this thing even exists in the first place.
Yeah.
God only knows how much useless bull crap procedures and manuals we see on a daily basis. And it's just nothing but fluff and extra requirements and stupidity. But that purpose statement has to justify why this procedure exists. And if you can't justify its existence, are you actually adding any value? Or just adding complexity to solve some problem that existed in someone's mind 5 years ago?
Absolutely.
I have spent so many hours fixing that issue in the bosses or someone's mind over the years. Luckily, I don't do that anymore, but I've done a lot. And then as a consultant, working with companies, is either there are misconceptions on what the symptom is versus what the cause is.
Yes.
And identifying the cause that's creating a symptom is critical, because people, like you mentioned, have a lot of misconceptions on what the cause is that's creating the symptom.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things he talks about, and Deming and all these guys, if you're a stats person, they're big on data analytics and tracking and numbers. Putting that overlay of tracking and data analytics on top of stuff leads you to identify really what the source is, not just kind of fix with a symptom. A lot of times you fix with a symptom and then you create another problem, versus actually backing up and look at the source. And a lot of it comes back, like nowadays you look at like the process associated with like lean and stuff like that, and asking the 5 whys and digging into root cause and stuff. And that's, I think the lean guys and a lot of the more modern stuff, all they did is repackage a lot of these kind of stuff and do better marketing and prettier PowerPoints.
Well, and that's kind of when I argue about Six Sigma so often, is it is a tool, but you cannot treat it as the entirety of the management system, right? It does not replace it. It is a component for problem solving or optimization of a component of a system.
And for those who don't know, it's to get your product to a 99.9999.
Yeah. You want less than a 1 in 1.5 million defect rate, right? And which is fantastic. But what are the unintended consequences of really focusing on this one? Maybe you engineered all sorts of extras around here, but how much extra time did you add to that process? Did you optimize the process or just the output?
Yeah. Yeah. I love data analytics, but I remember there was a quote that says there's lies, there's damned lies, and then there's statistics.
Oh, yeah.
And
I used to sell investment products, Steve. So
you're the king. I had done one of my old companies. I had tracked every project that our engineers worked on. And it was, at the time, it was a manual process, so it took a long time. But I found out that we were actually, our estimates and our actuals were really close. So I was giving myself a pat on the back.
Right.
But through that tracking, I was able to kind of itemize the big jobs that everyone's looking at versus all the little jobs that, guys would come in, hey, we need you to design this real fast or do this real quick. So we were really good at the big stuff because that's where everyone was looking. We were way overboard. Our estimates were like 3 times over. Or we underestimated the job like by 3 times for all the small stuff.
Yeah.
But at the average, we looked good.
Right.
But understanding that, doing the right data analytics allows us to say, hey, we need to shore this part up, all the small stuff.
Well, it's
what they say, causation is not correlation, or vice versa.
Well, and then he makes a distinction between what we call common causes and special causes. And so a common cause is just our system stinks. We're just going to have problems, right? So maybe you're buying, crap material because your supply team is told to find it cheap. So you get crap material, you get all the inclusions and defects in your weld or whatever. Does not matter how awesome your welder is. If it's crap material, you're going to get so many crap welds. You're not going to do anything about it. So you might be doing all these inspections thinking, oh, man, well, our welders just suck. So let's put them through a new training program. Let's run them through this certification. Let's get extra inspectors. Let's do this. Let's retool the weld machines. Let's do all these things. You're treating it like there's something specific you can fix. No, the problem is that you're harping on your supply chain to buy the cheapest material possible to save money. Meanwhile, you spent 20 times that on the cost of rework.
No, I digress here for a second, and I've used this example before. And before we get there, we have to do a shout out to Eagle Rare. And the folks at Buffalo Trace and the distillery. And cheers to these guys helping motivate us and keep us moving tonight. But the story I'm about to tell you is relevant because when you look at even distilled spirits, or I've mentioned it before, talking with you guys, is working with the Budweiser plant here in Houston. They wanted to get their process down to the point it was a man and a dog. A man to push the button and a dog to bite him if he touched anything else. And that's how they really worked on their process. And once you're doing anything in scale, if you're looking to scale up your business or move to that next level, having these processes in place that keep track of that is critical.
Yeah. Well, and again, that's kind of the nth extreme of a good system.
Yeah.
But it really does. It boils down to your system. That's why we call ISO and API and all this stuff, we call them management systems. And they are, to your point you made earlier, these are management systems. So just like Deming told Ford, if you want to improve the quality of your product, you got to get rid of the crap management.
Yeah, it's not just the guy in the factory.
No.
No, a lot of times, even in sales, a lot of times it's not following the right sales process. It's not having the right sales manager to motivate and keep people on target.
Yep.
It's not looking at the overall results. Look at the right results, because a lot of times people look at just the sales results, but don't look at meetings or activities and stuff like that.
Yeah, there's all sorts of stuff that feeds into it, but we just look at that defect and we treat every single defect, we treat every single problem or complaint as some sort of special cause that acted outside of the system, right? So someone made a bonehead mistake this day, or whatever the case may be. But maybe the problem really is we just haven't engineered our systems to prevent those things from bubbling up to the surface. Now, he talks about the Redbeat Experiment in here, and it's fascinating. There's videos on it. Go find it. I won't talk about it now. I have to hold myself back. But it's a really cool experiment because he basically goes into to prove the point. It doesn't matter how good your people are. if they keep trying to fix every single little problem, you're going to make it worse. And he calls it tampering. So you're tampering with the system by continually trying to tweak it. And we get so confused and we think that's continual improvement. And it's not. That's just tampering with the outputs to the system. We got to go back and replan and reevaluate how we're going to get better outputs.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. He had a good example of if this building is on fire and you put out the fire, you did not improve the process. You just put out the fire.
Yes.
So we focus on all of these risk assessments and inspections, but we don't get to the heart of what management has put in place. And if they don't help everyone understand what their job is, and what the ultimate goal is, and he talks about this a lot also, it's not about the next quarter's results.
No.
Because that only gets you to the next quarter.
Oh yeah, you can do all sorts of dumb things to make next quarter look good.
Yeah. So it's a long-term play. And in oil and gas, we usually always talk about CapEx. We'll try to reduce that CapEx budget.
Yeah.
But we find out that the OpEx budget dwarfs that.
Yeah.
And so we talk in terms of TOTEX now, total expenditures.
I've not heard that one yet.
Not just capital, not just operations, but the total expenditure. So if you can reduce the total, whether it comes from that initial project or the next 30 years of your of your expenses, that's really the improvement.
That's a consultant. Usually we just call that bottom line expense.
Look, I'll tell you right now, like that's one of the reasons that I hated the term consultant, which is funny because now I are one. But I mean, we all know what consultants do. Like they're going to find every excuse they have to justify their job, and they're going to milk that invoice for everything it's worth so they can get it again next month. And yeah, you got to find a way to eliminate that.
I've always found that the consultants, there was two buckets of consultants in my world. There was push up your tie guys and then pull up your sleeve kind of guys.
Yes.
And I always like working with the pull up your sleeve kind of guys. They'd get in there with you.
Well, hey, we had a couple of questions come in here.
Wow.
So we have Bill Bellows asked, he said, so given what you're explaining, is zero defects the ultimate level of quality? Could be.
No.
Partially involved.
It depends what you're doing.
Yes. And does continual improvement end at the achievement of zero defects? And I would argue no on both of those. There's a component of both.
The zero defects thing, in my estimation, I was always dealing with stuff that didn't have life or death consequences. When there's life or death consequences, zero defects is your only alternative.
Yes.
Like you don't want to be on the plane that's that 1% that crashes every year, right? So let's separate that out. And especially you guys work in all field services. But for me, working in financial services with numbers and stuff like that, there's a risk reward that you get to, whereas you can throw 500 people at a problem and get zero defects.
Yeah.
But the expenses go up so high that no one's going to buy your product.
Yes.
So there has to be some kind of design there. And I think the other question, from my perspective, and you guys can chime in, if zero defects is the end, it never is. And Deming even talks about continuous improvement, because then you want to look at the process, how you can shorten up cycle times, how you can improve throughput. And then the other piece, and I don't think Deming, like back then, we didn't really care about people. But nowadays, in this day and age, you probably want to consider the people doing the job. Are they getting satisfaction? Are they happy? Yeah. Is it ruining their lives? Are you injuring people?
Yeah.
But those are things you want to look at.
Well, I mean, Deming, though, he talked a lot about how his end goal was that people could take pride and ownership in the work, that you go home more fulfilled from the work you did than when you woke up in the morning. Now, I know that's, for someone working in a factory, it's a little more difficult to achieve. Mm-hmm. But isn't that basically what our safety culture aims for? Is we want you to go home as physically healthy as you came to work. And Deming tried very early for the time. I want you to go home as mentally fit as you came when you came to work today.
I looked to start this whole conversation. I started looking at definitions of what quality is.
Oh wow!
Ooh. And I came, and there was dozens. And I'll let you have the last word. I'll let you define what it is. But this is one I like best, and maybe it's not as traditional as you might expect. The quality is the ongoing process, so it never ends.
No.
The ongoing process of building and sustaining relationships But that's really, I never thought of quality in terms of relationships. By assessing, anticipating, and fulfilling stated and implied needs. So it needs to work as it's supposed to work.
Yep.
Because I think this was one of the videos I watched of Deming where he says you might weigh something one time, and okay, now you know what that thing weighs. But if you weigh it a second time, it's going to be slightly different.
Yeah.
And so now what does no one knows what it weighs anymore, and then you weigh it a third time. So you know who defines what the defect is and what acceptance is.
And that's where you get a lot of really interesting mathematics that can come into play to figure out what are the acceptable upper and lower control limits. If I were to give someone advice that wants to read the book, I would probably argue for the average person, stop before you hit page 200. You get to page 200, that's average people reading. Beyond page 200, he goes into all the mathematics to prove this type of stuff.
He is a mathematician, after all.
Yes.
Yeah, I would go a step further. He's a statistician.
Yes.
Yeah, he was big into all that data stuff.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's one of the reasons that it became what it is today.
He did it before he had Excel.
Yeah, this was all by hand. All by hand. Honestly, I don't think I could improve on that definition. I think that's a pretty darn concise
solid definition.
It is. I mean, you take a look at the ISO standard, and it surprises people in our workshops we do so often, because I'll spend half of the time in a workshop talking about cultural ideas. And they're like, Kyle, I even had someone once chime in, Kyle, we're talking about ISO 9001. Why are you talking about, how happy people are? I'm like, no, you don't get it. That's so crucial. Mm-hmm. If you hate your job, guess what? You're not going to do good. You're not going to find ways to improve. And it'll probably be the last thing I'd talk about here. So Deming makes a point, and it's a very valid point. And Rob, you can probably chime in on this from a sales perspective, is most of the time, the most critical facts we need to know are unknowable or unmeasurable. Mm. So what is your true perception in the marketplace? How do you really know that?
Yeah, as a provider of products and stuff, not knowing really what your clients want or need. And I get into all the time with people. Oftentimes, salespeople interpret, send me some information, email me that, or something of those lines as a positive. Mm-hmm. I'm like, no, you just got blown off. That's done. That's the end of the conversation. That person's going to ghost you for life now.
Yeah.
You're blocking your number right now.
Yeah.
Because you did not provide enough value up front. You didn't lock in a next step. You didn't do all those things you have to do. And people are conflict adverse. Mm-hmm. So they're not going to say, Steve, this sounds really good, but I don't think it's for me. And
because you're afraid you're going to follow it with another pitch.
Yeah.
And so how do you get that actual perception?
Mm-hmm.
Or with your employees, how do you know if the people working for you are actually happy in the job you're doing? I mean, it's a very rare breed of people that go, you know what, Steve? This week sucked.
That's the cultural side of it.
Yeah.
Because a couple of weeks ago or a couple of months ago, we talked about measure what matters.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And he is very derogatory towards annual reviews and assessments, as was John Doerr and Andy Boyd. But they realized it's not just that one conversation.
Correct.
It's a continuous conversation all year long.
Yeah.
And so if you establish that kind of culture in a company, then you don't have to ask, am I doing a good job? Because you'll know what to do.
Yeah.
Because based on what culture tells you to do.
Mm-hmm. One of the things while we're on that topic, working with the team at Berkman, working with the reports, one of the things that separates us from other assessments that are out there is a lot of assessments measure your usual kind of how you show up. One of the things we do is we go a little deeper is measure your needs. Yeah. Those hidden needs, and the example we use a lot of times is like a tree. Mm-hmm. You can see the tree, but you don't see the roots.
Right.
So you don't see what is actually feeding that tree and giving it an energy.
Yeah.
And to your point earlier, once you identify those needs of your people and the people you work with, you have better relationships. And
folks have argued and understand the argument is, well, so people are so incredibly different. I'm like, they are, but people are also a lot alike, and people do have choice in where they work. So if you have a certain, creeper, there you go. So if you have a certain culture in your company that just doesn't fit with someone, it should be pretty obvious. This isn't where I need to work. I don't fit in here, and let them go on. In fact, I would argue help them find that next job. Say, look, this really isn't a fit. Are
Jim
you?
Collins talks about having the right people on the bus.
Yes.
Yeah.
So.
I mean, all this stuff gets intertwined. All of it gets intertwined. So no, there's a lot of fun ways. You know, something I started doing recently is for the small team we have is, and I intend to do this as we grow, is I have them fill out a weekly report. Now, the weekly report's not what you would expect. It's just a little Microsoft form. It's 8 questions on it. And I ask basic things like, how stressed out were you this week? How was your workload this week? What was your high of this week? What was your low? What were the goals you set for the week and what'd you achieve? It's really all I care about. And so it takes like 5-10 minutes to fill out. And so that's something that I'm wanting to do so I can kind of get a better sense and feel of it. Because I know me, I'm a workaholic. I'll probably be here till midnight tonight working on other stuff after we finish this chat. But I don't want everyone else to think that they have to work that way just because I do, you know? And it's so easy to get caught in those little mindsets. Yeah. So that's all I got, guys, unless you got anything else.
No, I think one of the things we didn't focus on a lot was the people aspect of it.
Yeah.
And the people's a big part of it in any organization. So just as you're going through this, the stats, the processes and stuff are all great, but make sure you're keeping your people motivated and happy and on the right direction.
I think that's a good point to end on. I don't think I can improve there.
Yeah.
So for everyone listening, if you haven't already, make sure to take a minute. Obviously, the stuff you got to do, hit subscribe, like, comment. We want to know what you think. We're really wanting to do a lot more with the book club here. Steve's got some fun ideas, maybe some ways we can restructure releasing this and have a little bit more fun with it. But let me know what you like. If you got any recommendations for future books, let us know.
Or bourbons. If you have a bourbon you want to try.
Yeah, definitely.
So, and we'll
if we can find it at the local specs, we will try it.
There you go. Take it easy, guys.
Good night.